Hello, this is part 2 of my 3-part interview with cult recovery counselor and family therapist Rachel Bernstein. If you haven't seen part 1, I urge you to do so since we covered so much important information in that video about what a destructive cult is and how to spot one. In part 2 here, we cover cult control methods, from the power of group agreement to the use of language as a way to shape someone's thinking. In any destructive cult or mass movement, language plays a very important role. As George Orwell pointed out, political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidity to pure wind. It's not just politicians who specialize in this. Using language as a weapon is a hallmark of a destructive cult leader. Without trying to sound like a commercial, which this is not, if you're a cult survivor and feel you could benefit from professional counseling, I've put contact information for Rachel in the description below, as well as a link to her website. I've come to discover recently that there are not a lot of therapists out there who understand destructive cults and how they operate. So people like Rachel can be of real benefit to people looking for someone who understands what they've been through. I'm not endorsing any one person over any others. I intend to interview more cult recovery specialists on this channel, and I think there's something to learn from all of them. But if you're seeking help, Rachel is certainly someone who can do the job. I've also got some articles on my own blog about recovering from Scientology, the destructive cult I was part of for 27 years, and links to those articles are also in the description below. Without further ado, here is part 2 of our interview.
Groups like Scientology have going for it, I should say, I say that kind of ironically, but what they do have going for them is that there's the whole social psychological piece there. The group of people around you are also getting you very pumped up, and you're not just having one conversation with one person who's going to try to convince you of something. If they think you're going to be a hard sell, they're going to bring in others who are going to tell you how wonderful this is and how you need to make a decision now. And so you feel like there's something wrong with you, that you're not somehow seeing how great this is. And you might believe that this is something that's really an opportunity you can't pass up. I, every once in a while, go check out cults. I go to free introductory meetings and parts of weekends, and I do it to collect information so that when someone comes to my office, I feel like it's doing sort of due diligence, where I want to find out if it's safe, right? If it's safe for me to do it. I want to find out if this is really happening there. Not that I'm at all doubting my clients, but I want to kind of see, I want to get a flavor for that place and the language that's used and all that. And I know we'll talk about language at some point.
For sure, because it's a whole subject in itself in terms of control.
Oh, absolutely. So there was one particular cult group that I went to. I was getting a lot of calls. It's sort of a Jewish mystical group. There are not a lot of cults that are Jewish, not as many as other groups, but I wanted to check it out. And as soon as I started questioning the teachings, and really, so if you buy this book, you won't get cancer. And if you bathe in especially blessed water, you'll cure yourself of diseases. And wow, that's fascinating. And really, there was a huge earthquake in California 2 years ago, but because the members prayed and were able to buy more editions of the books that they sell there, then we in California then didn't feel the earthquake. That's why we didn't feel it, and there was no damage.
This is stuff you've really heard.
So, you wouldn't.
Well, I just have to laugh because everything you're saying has numerous instances just pop up in my head of times that has happened. That exact thing happened in Scientology, right? From my own experience.
Okay. Yeah.
The Berlin Wall coming down in the 1980s. So what was it, 1987, 88?
Uh-huh.
was directly attributed in the world of Scientology to the release of their highest OT level, OT8, and people getting started on that and finishing it on that ship they have, the Free Winds.
Mm-hmm.
That was the catalyst for the Berlin Wall, on the other side of the world, coming down, is because of all the free, spirit energy, that they call it theta, that was released with those OT8s having been newly minted and created on the ship, the Free Winds. And that was cause effect. Like, there was no joke about it. We really thought, and I have to say, I actually believed that that was the case.
Yeah, well, you want it to be true. When you have devoted so much time, or you've been raised in a group, or the people you love are in it, and you want to believe that what everyone you love and your friends believe is actually valid, you're going to make it somehow make sense in your mind. You're going to let yourself be kind of open to this idea of making connections between things that are not connected. And the way that that's usually done is by way of proving the power of the leader and proving the power of the group, and proving why it needs to exist and how much it can do in the world. And so much happened during the turn of the century, too, that the end of the world was predicted by, I'd say, a good 12 groups that I knew about. And it didn't happen, right? Because we're still here. But in each group, it was explained in a different way.
We're still here.
Right. Hey. But in each group that I dealt with, it was explained in a different way. And it was all because of that leader of that group. And it was all because the followers were listening to what the leader told them to do, and it was all, the proof was all used to kind of validate the power of that particular group and its teachings. So what I noticed was that when I went to this meeting, everyone was supposed to be a newbie there, but after I started, I decided to start questioning, because you find out a lot about the true nature of a group when you question what the teacher has said, and you question what the leader has said, and you question the teachings. That doesn't go over well, ever, which helps you know that it's not a healthy group, helps you know it's a destructive group where you can't have your critical thinking, and you can't be a voice of reason or dissension. Never okay. Like being with a partner of any sort who is controlling, who's a narcissist, never okay to disagree. But I noticed that when I started asking questions like, okay, let's say I buy all the books and I do everything you tell me to do. I read every word and I come to every meeting, and I still get cancer, then what? Well, there's an immediate answer, as there is in all of these groups, because they've been trained to have these immediate answers. And it was, well, that would be because when you were reading the books, you weren't truly accepting the words into your heart, right? My fault. And I said, I just can't believe that that's so. And the class took a break. And about 4 people who were pretending to be new students came over to me to work on me. The people in the room also were looking at me like they were mad at me because I was crashing their spiritual party, right? And they wanted to have a transcendent moment, and they wanted to believe in this, and I was getting in the way of that. So these people
Just
came
crashing
over.
the party.
Right. These people.
This like total spoil sport, damn that critical thinking.
I know. Right. Exactly. I know. I'm bad at parties. So, but the people came over and they said, oh, you don't realize, we know someone who had pancreatic cancer, and someone rushed into the emergency room and handed the surgeon our holy books And because of that, when they opened her up, the cancer was gone. Oh, there's so much wrong with that story. Like, you
think?
You know, but a surgeon would say, oh, thanks for the book. Like, I just scrubbed, I'm doing surgery. What do you do? Who let you in, right? I mean, I had a lot of questions. Whatever. And you don't realize that this person lived to be something because they bought these books and they listened to these tapes and they drank this water. And someone leaned in when they knew they weren't getting to me, and he said, and also, if you buy these books, you'll figure out a nice mystical way to get out of paying for parking tickets. And I thought, wow, I'm going to always remember that. You know, there are these moments where you say, that's going to be seared in my mind as the kookiest thing. So I should pay however many hundreds of dollars to sign up for this so I can get out of paying for it. And why would I want to get out of paying? Just, you know, is all nuts. But the part that is so true when I think about all of this is I think about a phrase that I learned years ago by Eric Fromm, where he says, common customs and beliefs save people from isolation. And in some ways, people are finding a way to connect, and they're finding a way to belong. And they're finding a way, either in a large group or one-on-one, to feel a part of a community. And sometimes that is enough. So they take all the other, like, the, you know, paying for parking tickets and whatever else. All right, that's just part of it. And Encino, just part of it. But now I have a sense of purpose and I have a sense of community. And so I'll just put up with all of the other stuff. There's a lot of sort of having it just go into the background when it shouldn't. All of those things should matter. I think the other part, though, that's really harmful, that I see a lot of pain around with my clients, is the conditionality of the relationships in this group. Here they're forfeiting their lives sometimes, and their thinking, and their ability to have critical thinking, and their ability to protect themselves, and their relationships to people outside, so they can have this community. So they can have these people who say they love them, and they are convinced these are the first people they can trust and the first people who really do truly love them. But then as soon as they question it or they think about leaving or they leave, that's it. That's the end. That's the end of all of those relationships. And they don't know it on the onset, but that's what happens.
Yeah, very much so. Scientology is far from the only group that practices that disconnection or shunning policy. You know, we certainly talk about that a lot in Scientology, and and with good reason. It's a horrifying policy. It breaks up families and friendships and businesses, and it shouldn't exist. It shouldn't be that people have to have conditional relationships like that, where you're only a friend, or you're only a son or a daughter or a mother or a father, as long as you maintain loyalty to the cult.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. Exactly. I think also people are threatened with being ostracized and being kicked out and being shunned. And that's also a means of control. When you want to manipulate someone, right, to stay in line, you tell them that you're going to threaten them with not having any of this again. And once people feel that they've been ostracized or shunned, it's part of our human nature to want to get back in. To want to get back into the good graces of the group, of the leader, of the people there. Prove your allegiance. Prove that you're willing to make these sacrifices. Prove that you're a new person. You've changed. Instead of taking that time and saying, now that I'm on the outside, let me actually do some research here. Let me access some information I haven't been able to. Let me talk to some people. But no, we are geared towards, I mean, just it's part of who we are to a great degree. We're geared towards trying to find our way back to the cool lunch table, you know? And so instead, what people find out is sometimes the people at the cool lunch table are actually not so cool or not so nice, or they're the bullies. But somehow we think we're supposed to be with them, but no, we're not. It's probably safer not to be.
It is a human need. We have that whole belonging, and I don't know. For myself, I've always just kind of taken it back to the genes and sort of pack herd mentality, and it's kind of a gut level instinctual need, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think it's undeniable that we're social creatures.
Yes. Yeah, and undeniable, and through survival, we're geared towards all of it, and we need it.
Yeah, exactly. Very much so.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, the other thing that we need and use is language, and we touched on this very, very briefly earlier, but let's talk about this for a second. How language is used as a specific tool of destructive cults as a control factor. What's your experience been with that?
Language is very important, and it's a huge part of the control that's used within cultic groups. It's something that actually loved ones will notice right away when they hear people who they didn't know were involved in a cult suddenly using different kind of language, speaking in another way, also having a certain tone that feels a little more robotic, not as warm, a little more humorless and regimented, like they have automatic answers. That whole idea of the thought-stopping techniques, where they've been taught certain phrases to use so that they don't have to think about even how to answer your question and how they would want to answer your question. They just go basically by what was on the 3x5 card that they were given for when someone asked them that question. But language is very unifying. If anyone has ever traveled abroad or suddenly immigrated to a new country, if they find people who speak their language from home, they feel a kinship. They feel a certain trust. They connect with each other and rely on each other. And there's a sense, this person understands me, right? He speaks my language. So that's what I think what cult leaders are betting on, that people are then going to feel connected, like there's a mutual understanding. What it also does is it separates people out from the other people in their lives who don't speak that language, who don't have that lingo, who haven't studied the Scientology dictionary, and don't know all the acronyms. There's so many acronyms.
Does that phenomenon happen in other destructive cults? Because it's rife in Scientology. I mean, there are countless number pages and pages and pages of acronyms.
I have a dictionary here, actually. It's just unbelievable. It's huge. And yes, it's acronym after acronym, PTSSP, everything, MOUSE. I mean, it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah. You can practically have an entire conversation, or at least trade off a few sentences, made up of almost nothing but acronyms. He had an ARC break with the PTS terminal that was actually the SP, and we got that resolved ASAP. But that sentence actually means something to a Scientologist,
Yes, it does. And it's actually, I mean, it is so trippy because it's English, but it's not English, and it's English and used in other ways. Terms that we're familiar with are defined in other ways, like the term handle. Oh yeah, I'll handle it. No, in Scientology, you handle a person. It's very different.
Yes, in fact, I think the redefinition of regular English words is even craftier than coming up with brand new words, because you take these associations people have and then you twist them around.
Yes, it's so true. And so language also creates a certain kind of emotion in us. if, for example, a cult leader wants you to not believe that you're being held, for example, okay, perfect example. A couple years ago, I was sent to Texas to help with the raid on the FLDS compound, the very, very cultic branch of the Latter-day Saints there. Its own kind of rogue renegade group with the leaders now in jail. It should have been many years ago. But when talking to the children and to the women who were taken off the compound and asking them about the locked gates that surrounded the entire compound, those gates were not to keep people in. They were not to lock them in. It was to keep the bad people out. It was a way to protect the people. So you weren't prisoner, right? You weren't being locked in. You were being protected from all these other bad people. So everything is seen and talked about in a way to kind of engender other kinds of emotions. I think about also when there was this, it was awful, this video that was done by the members of Heaven's Gate before they committed suicide. This was a group in San Diego, and it made news because it was another mass suicide. And they interviewed them, I think it was the day before, the night before they were going to be committing suicide. And they asked them how they felt. Some of them actually looked pretty terrified, but their words were different from the looks in their eyes. And others looked like they were truly convinced that this was a good thing. So nobody talked about suicide. Nobody used the word death. They all talked about how they were leaving this world and going to another. They were finding a new place to live. They were going to a higher place. They were leaving their bodies and following their souls. They were going to the mothership. They were going to be closer to their God. It was all of this talk that then when you say those words, when you say, oh, well, I'm going to be going to a higher spiritual place, it doesn't trigger any kind of fear in you. It doesn't trigger panic. But if you say, actually, tomorrow I'm going to be killing myself, you're going to have a reaction. So the leader, I think, makes sure that the words that the followers are given to describe what's happening and how they're supposed to understand it triggers just the kind of response that they want, which is not one of panic, but one of just going along with it because there's nothing to worry about. One of the things that happens too within cults is that the leaders are often given the names that are akin to mother and father in whatever language that would be appropriate for that particular cult. And in fact, there is a cult leader named Sri Chinmoy who, believe it or not, used to run his meetings out of the UN. He had a meeting room there, and he called his followers, even though they were adults, he called them boys and girls, which is very purposeful, so that he was the father and they were his children. And you then have to listen to your parents as you would, right? And not question your parents. I one time also went to a forum meeting. And I wanted to see how it had changed from the days of Est to the Forum and now Landmark. But at the time, it was the Forum, and I walked in. I had to write this down. So I wrote this down because there's no way I could memorize this. As I walked in, the person in charge was saying, language is the house of being. That doesn't mean anything. But people were saying, "Oh, yeah," and I thought
the house of being.
Language is the house of being, but that's not a thing, right?
That means absolutely nothing.
So I thought this is going to be interesting. So I quickly got out my pad of paper that I keep in my purse, and I thought, well, I have to get this down. Because if someone says, oh, what kind of language was used? I thought, there's no way I'm going to remember that because it's nonsensical. So it's like you're having to memorize a particular poem that doesn't make sense, which actually some groups will tell you to do. So the next phrase that came out of the instructor's mouth was, again, how to write this down. This weekend is all about dancing with listening in a conversation for possibility. Okay, so I heard that and I quickly looked around and people are nodding their heads. And to me, it was, I mean, it's just word soup, right? It's just like you threw words into a big pot, just mix it around and said, here. And you just like threw them on the floor and here they are.
Have you ever seen those Deepak Chopra random meme generators? Random saying generators, right? Where you just throw quantum and galactic and healing and, you know, electronic, and they just these buzzwords, and they just throw them into these nonsensical statements, and they come out, you know, like they're supposed to be saying something.
Yes. And so people are nodding their heads, and I'm looking around and I'm thinking, that's fascinating, because that's the group psychology. That's the social psychological piece. You all have to pretend like you get it. You don't want to be the odd man out who doesn't, because there's something wrong with you, right?
Right.
So you don't want to seem unenlightened. You don't want to seem like you are closed-minded. You don't want to seem like you're not bright enough or brave enough or whatever enough to get it. Which cult leaders, I think, rely upon also, that you're going to keep yourself in check. People are also going to keep each other in check, and they then can say whatever they want, and they can promise whatever they want. And if it doesn't come true, again, it's your fault. I mean, the really destructive part of language, though, is when abuses are explained away, and when you have some leaders who are sexually inappropriate with the children within a group, but they call it cleansing, and they call it a lot of other things, right? Being specially chosen, having a higher spiritual moment, whatever it is. And that's when it gets awful, because that's when language is used to justify horrific behavior. Mm-hmm. And you actually have to help children raised in that see that it's called something else. It's actually called rape. But it's never going to be called that in the group.
Just everything you've said, 100% spot on, and I've seen countless examples of that in my own experience, and heard about it now from others as well. One other thing I thought about with language myself that I wanted to ask you about is the way that a word can be defined or used in a cult in such a way that it narrows your thinking to certain channels along which things, that your worldview is shaped by the language. And an example of that might be being in Scientology, there's this big whole idea of being a potential trouble source or being PTS. Mm-hmm. And if you're PTS, it means that there is some big bad guy, some suppressive person who's trying to squash you and hold you down and antagonistic to you in your life, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the phenomena of this is that if you ever get sick, have accidents, fall ill, anything bad happens to you basically in your day-to-day living in Scientology, you are instantly assigned this label that you have become PTS. And it's not supposed to be this permanent condition, because it's something that Scientology is supposed to be able to deal with and handle and make it go away by whatever procedure they're going to do. But it then creates this idea, because you can then get PTS again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then you have to do the whole other handling again. And my point being, not that this is all bullshit, because it is, but that worldview now channels all of your thinking into this one path, where every single time anybody in the world, anybody in your world, anybody yourself, anybody at all, whoever gets sick, falls ill, has an accident, that's what it is, and it can't be anything else. And so you then stop thinking of other things that could be causing those kind of situations. And I believe that, from what I've seen, that there's more than a few Scientologists, for example, who are very anti-vaxxers. And of course they're going to be anti-vaxxers, because they think that if you get sick, it's because you're PTS, because there's some SP in your environment, not because you didn't get vaccinated like any moron should, and to protect your body, right? No, we don't need that. That's not part of what we need. What we need is to find the SP and handle that person, right, sort of thing. And so, and that's just one of many examples in Scientology that I've come to realize was limiting my thinking to these certain channels, But I wanted to ask about that, whether, what your opinion was on that thought.
Right. So I think it's very powerful. You have this, I think, something else just to describe when you were talking originally about what makes a destructive cult is that there's no system of checks and balances, there's no governing body, and there's no kind of group of people that you can check out information with. And so people who are in these groups can't say, am I really this? Am I abusive? And I didn't think of myself in that way, or I didn't think of myself as a potential trouble source. I thought I was going along with things, and I didn't think that I was also evil incarnate, or of the devil, or again, whatever else the teachings of the group are. And so you start to take it on, and it becomes the filter through which you're seen. It really, I want to say, almost rather than a filter, it's more like a prism. It kind of distorts the way you're seen.
That's a good way of putting it.
And so it happens a lot with people who decide something about you right away. And then when you act differently, they say, oh, that was really out of character for you. Well, that wasn't. That's me. You decided that I was something else. And that's actually not who I am, because people are complex. People are multi-layered, and people are in moods. And especially if you're in a cult and you haven't slept and you're under pressure, and maybe you haven't eaten very much, or you had to eat very fast and you really didn't get a chance to relax, you're going to be in a particular mood. And then you're blamed for being in a particular mood. Well, you are this very bad and, kind of reactive person. Well, I wouldn't have been if I wasn't put in a situation like this. But what's also true is that you want to, out of the goodness of your heart, take that on for size. Well, maybe I did do that. Maybe I'm going to be self-reflective here. I'm going to do the thing that cult leaders never do. And I'm going to wonder for a moment if there's something that I did do that was wrong. And that seems to be what everyone around me thinks. So maybe they're right. And I have no one else to ask about it. And people then start to really believe it about themselves a lot of the time, that something is wrong with them, or they're tainted in some way, that they're faulty, that they cause trouble, that they cause bad things to happen, when really they're perfectly fine and they need to not be labeled. It's like calling kids who have learning disabilities lazy. We know that they're beyond not lazy. They're working so hard just to focus, just to get it. They're working 10 times harder than the people around them. but because their work is coming back incomplete, they didn't try hard enough and they're lazy or they're stupid. So society is not innocent when it comes to this too, but cults really maximize it. And cults also are simplistic, very black and white thinking. So someone is good or someone is bad, and someone is lower or someone is higher. But people aren't really seen in all of their complexity. And it's unfortunate when you start to believe those things to be true about you.
Very much so. There is very much a blame the victim mentality in cults and destructive cults. And this is, I think, also one of the control factors of keeping a person, always on pins and needles a little bit. Although they might not necessarily even feel like they're on pins and needles. It's such a tricky thing. But something you said made me think of this, which was the fact that the cult leader, the cult itself, the cult teachings are never in error. They can never be wrong. They can never be questioned. Mm-hmm. Or if they are questioned, I mean, of course, people could question them, but the answer is always, no, it's you. It's always flipped back on the person. No, what did you not understand? What did you do wrong? What is it about you that you're not accepting that this is true? Because look, everybody else does. Whatever response is given, it's always direct the attention back on the person instead of, looking at the cult or the cult leader. And in fact, that's so symptomatic of them that I think, would you agree that itself would be one of the symptoms of a destructive cult?
Right. When you're in a destructive cult, there is an absolute domino effect where the leader can push the dominoes down this way, away from him or her, but it never goes back up. The kind of accountability never travels the other direction. That again is set up by someone who can't tolerate being questioned or being disagreed with or being wrong or being seen as imperfect or as not having special powers, whatever that particular leader needs. So it's everyone else's fault, and you have to be self-reflective, and you have to do self-flagellation basically all the time, and you have to apologize and work harder and try harder and be different and devote more of your time and energy to your work within the group to kind of make it right and make amends. And what gets, again, lost in all of this is if what you were told about you was even true, or if it was just a way to have you go back onto the hamster wheel. And then more time passes and you are being kind of, beating yourself up because you have a conscience and because you're a good person, you're going to do that. And I think the other part, though, that I've noticed a lot is that when people can label other people away as being less than or being faulty or being damaged, I think then people within the cult don't have to have as much compassion towards them. And there's very little compassion in a cult. Very little compassion towards the people outside the cult, right? If something bad happened to you, you brought it on yourself. And within a cult, again, you're working through your karma. You need to go. That's actually reminding me, a particular cult group that I visited for another introductory meeting. We were told that that children who are abused need to not be felt sorry for and need to not be protected because that is something that is going to help them because they're going through a spiritual correction. It means that they did something bad in a previous life, and now this is something that's going to help them in a future life be able to have a better life. Right?
Child was justified with this.
Yes. Yes. And it
I
was,
don't even know why I keep finding myself saying this over and over again. I just don't even know why I should be surprised by that.
right. And so here, this person from birth is seen as having something wrong. But what I think is also then hard is that then you don't have somebody saying to you, you know what, that was really unfair. You shouldn't have been called that. And that's not right about you. And I'm going to talk to them because they really need to know who you really are and that you're a good person and that you really didn't mean that. And very few people come to each other's defense within a cult because then they're going to be on the hot seat. They can't risk it. So you don't get support. And you're on your own. And you're kind of dealing with this by yourself.
Yeah.
I think also, and it might seem like a leap, but I just thought of Hitler. I just thought of how in order for him to get people to not have their conscience triggered when they were killing millions and millions of people, he needed for people to see the victims as subhuman, calling them vermin, that they were somehow a threat. They were a plague. They weren't people. And I think if you can shift how people see others and reduce them in other people's minds, then I think a lot of bad things can happen to them and no one steps in to protect them. And no one thinks that really something is happening that's really wrong and should be stopped.
Very true. It just occurred to me, in fact, I try to shy away from, I think it's called Godwin's Law, the thing on the internet where, you give it enough time and eventually any argument or any case being made by somebody will eventually be compared to the Nazis or to Hitler, right? This is just a thing on the internet. I think they call it Godwin's Law. But with destructive cults in particular, it so easily lends itself to comparison because Hitler was a destructive cult leader. And his methods and the way his inner circle operated and the things that they did were a case study of a destructive cult and a very blatant and very large-scale operation. And those techniques and all of the things that were done psychologically, emotionally, to manipulate people, and of course physically, and in the end, killing people, are all techniques that are used by destructive cult leaders today. Because those are not because Hitler did it,
right?
Not even because Hitler invented it. They're used because that's what works. That's what people respond to. They respond to those, those antagonistic appeals to emotion when they can find a target that's not them as a reason to blame their troubles or failures on or something, for example, just as one example. And we see that with Donald Trump right now. Just to, ride a little hobby horse there on my dislike of that man. But I see him playing the crowds the exact same way that, I'm not the first person to make the comparison to Hitler, right? And when you appeal to people's baser emotions as a reason to be followed, you're using a cult leader technique.
Exactly.
Martin Luther King was not a destructive cult leader, and yet he had millions of people willing to listen to what he had to say and follow him. And there is, in no way, shape, or form was Martin Luther King a destructive cult leader. He did not have the traits of a destructive cult leader. He had the traits of a great leader, and he was responsible for tremendous social reform and civil rights reform. That's not what destructive cult leaders do, right? And Martin Luther King didn't use destructive cult leader techniques in appealing to people. Right? He talked about freedom and liberty, and he meant it. Hitler talked about freedom and liberty, but he talked about freedom and liberty by persecuting a whole class of people. And let's direct hatred toward that group of people, and I'm just making a black and white comparison there because I just kind of got off on this, but It's you bring up Hitler, and I think that's a reason. I think it's not necessarily Godwin's law at work here. I think it's a valid analogy.
Right. I also am not so overreactive that I compare everything to Hitler, and like.
No, it's the first time you've ever said anything about the man. So.
Exactly. Like, oh, my mail is late. My mailman must be. No, I don't
Mail
do
Nazis.
Mail Nazis. Exactly. I've heard of those. It's a new cult. But if we study Hitler, yeah, we're studying cults. We're studying the drama that he created by having these rallies, by having kind of gatherings at night with bonfires, and having it be where you are connected to what's happening, and you have a adrenaline rush that is also multisensory. The visual is very powerful of having everyone in lockstep, and having the sounds of the music, and again the bonfire and all of that. It is a rush, and you feel like something important is really happening. Different from Martin Luther King, who was responding to something that was really going on. Hitler was manufacturing an issue. He was using magical thinking to create a problem that didn't exist, right? He was responding to the fact that people were having a hard time financially at the time, et cetera, et cetera. But there wasn't a problem of Jews and homosexuals, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, whoever he thought was less than, somehow creating something that would be dangerous for the whole world and would keep the world from being able to continue as it should. So he created an issue and then said, I have the solution. Now I can help you. It's like cults where they knock you down, but they want you to forget about that part. They only want you to remember when they reach their hand down and help you get back up. They want you to then feel indebted to them for helping them. But you didn't actually need help to begin with. They just made you think, right? Taking the personality test. Oh, these are all the things that are wrong with you. No, but you then, if you can be convinced of it, then you do need their help. And then you feel indebted and you need to pay back. So Hitler was protecting the world from some imaginary threat. But I think also he did a lot of things that were very controlling that cult leaders do. Public shaming and public criticism, shooting people who he felt had betrayed him, who were major players in the Nazi movement. You knew that you were on shaky ground and you had to do exactly as he said. I think the other part, though, is that because he used this kind of magical thinking, people couldn't really prove it or disprove it. And they just wanted to go along with someone who was charismatic. And cult leaders are charismatic. I mean, I've met a few cult leaders, and some are very odd, but they are charismatic to a whole group of people. But this is also why conspiracy theories are so popular, because there's something where you feel like there's danger out there and it's lurking, and unless you're on top of it, unless you know what's happening and what people are up to, then you're never going to be safe. And Hitler offered people that. I mean, his whole agenda was a conspiracy theory.
Exactly. And I definitely have made it clear on my channel that I'm not super into conspiracy theories. Because they tend to be very illogical, irrational, and connect dots that shouldn't be connected. And those are at least those are, I should say those are the kind of conspiracy theories that I don't like to subscribe to, because they don't make any damn sense. If a conspiracy theory comes along that actually makes sense and does connect dots that should connect and does have correct causation and not false causation and that sort of thing, and false correlation, and if it has real correlation, then it's something I could actually get behind, you know. And that's one thing that drives me nuts about the conspiracy theories, which
Mhm.
do unfortunately tend to go hand in hand with a lot of cult thinking, I've noticed.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that cult leaders can use to control people, because if you get a sense that somehow there is danger lurking, and then the only way to be free of it and to be safe from it is by following what the cult leader tells you to do, then you're going to feel in some ways that it would be unsafe for you to be outside of this group. It would be unsafe for you to leave it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They set up false enemies and false conspiracies against the cult, for example, or against the United States or something. Like back in the 50s when Hubbard first started, it was all about the communists, and of course that was huge in the 50s, and then especially in the early 50s because McCarthyism and all that, and then it became the Psychs and the AMA and the APA, and they were in collusion with the CIA and the FBI, and they were all after Scientology, and then it became the 12 men who really rule the world, and psychiatry is just their tool to do it, and it became this vast global conspiracy against Scientology because, and the proof of that is, because of course they're doing that because we're the only group that can free people and undo their machinations and slave tactics and that sort of thing. So it's sort of like this crazy circular thing that goes on.
Right, exactly. I think also just that phrase when you said we're the only group that can, right? Just however you want to end that sentence. If you get involved in something that says we are the only group or this is the only way, that's when you want to locate your nearest exit. Right? That is.
If there's one piece of advice you can take away from today's episode, there it is, right there.
Right. Yeah. Even in a relationship, I'm the only man, woman, whatever, who's going to love you. Who, bye now. Bye.
Yeah, you're waving this way as you're walking out the door.
Right. Exactly.
All right.